Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on history of English literature, today we will be talking on the postmodern wave, and for this very discussion we have once again with us in our studios Professor Bhim Singh Dahiya. Professor Bhim Singh Dahiya is formerly Vice Chancellor of Kurukshetra University, and Professor Dahiya has wrote a number of books. His popular book is on a new history of English literature, as well as he is a renowned academician who is appreciated worldwide. So dear friends, let's welcome our guest Professor Bhim Singh Dahiya, and let's try to understand more and more on the topic, the postmodern wave. Hello sir, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Thank you. Well, today we will be discussing the postmodern wave, which is the last phase of the literary history that we started. Now, there is a problem with the titling of this period. Modernism was almost 100 years ago. That was a phenomenon immediately following World War I or around that time, 1914, 1918. That was the period of World War I. And during that phase, whatever ideas came about literature, particularly from Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, they were considered the theorists of modernism, and they gave the impression as if the entire literary history of the West, whenever it began with the Greeks, Homer, around 1000 BC, right from there up to World War I, the beginning of the 20th century, they dubbed the whole thing as traditional. And whatever now is coming up, they termed it as modern. It was just like the birth of Christ, that before the birth of Christ, it is BC, before Christ, and after that it is AD, after the death of Christ. So the entire history is remeasured or measured afresh, and the whole outlook on literary history is that one block of the entire hundreds and thousands of years of history as traditional, and now after World War I, whatever is coming is modern. So this posed its own problems. For example, where do we go from now? What comes after modernism? And not finding any appropriate or suitable name for it, the historians named it as postmodern, which means giving all the importance to modernism, that nothing was very important before modernism, and now whatever follows is postmodern. This is a very erroneous way, I would say, of looking at history, scanning it, classifying it, categorizing it, because for all times to come, just as all times that have gone by, thousands of years, we call them pre-modern, and now all that will be coming thousands of years again, it is postmodern. Now what way is this? The earlier was more practical, more sensible, and more, you see, knowledgeable and educative. For example, we had the Elizabethan age, then we had the Augustan age, then we had the Victorian age. Now all these ages were linked up with histories and were linked up with socio-economic or socio-political thought. So the history will give you complete idea of what the age was like, what was happening in different, you see, areas of knowledge, history, politics, philosophy, literature, so on and so forth. But now when you just, you see, give a blanket term like modernism and postmodernism, where do you go next? You have blocked the future passage. Everything coming now is postmodern. It cannot be the same. Every age, at least twice in a century, that has been the experience, comes up with its own knowledge, its own problems, its own progresses, and all that put together, we, you see, consider it as one unit. Now those units are done away with, and we are left with only something vague and blank, modern and postmodern. So I have always been questioning it, but unfortunately nothing has followed. We still continue with the postmodern. Now what is postmodern? No one knows. So anything coming after World War I, now it is full 100 years. So anything coming after that is postmodern, and it will go on for hundreds and thousands of years. So you can't have just one blanket term for all that will be coming and all that has gone by. So the literary historians, they have to give a thought to it, and they have to find more specific ways as they were before it, before the phenomenon of postmodernism. Something concrete, something specific, something speaking, something knowledgeable, something educative. Now we have to go back to all that. Otherwise, it is futile exercise to speak of history. So during this period, call it postmodern, because we can't do without it now. It has been made current, it has been imposed upon us, and we are dealing with it. We have accepted it as it is, and as I said, arbitrarily, just like the birth of Christ. Otherwise, humanity and its history was there before the birth of Christ, thousands of years, and it will go on for thousands of years again. What is so important about one event? That nothing else matters. For that matter, every other religion can fix a similar kind of date, that the world began on such and such date, when Hinduism came or Mohammedanism came or any other religion, Buddhism came. So this is a very silly way, I would say. of naming any period. And now the period called postmodern is unlimited, because nothing has come after that. It is over 100 years now. So, will it go on forever, for thousands of years? So, some thought has to be given to it, and we have to go back to the earlier method of naming periods of history on the basis of specific distinguishing features of that particular period or age. As I gave you the example of the Elizabethan age or the Augustan age or the Victorian age, that was sensible. With the moment you name, you immediately know what it means. But if you say modern, postmodern, no one really know what it means. And how long? For hundreds and thousands of years. Now all the history that will follow will remain postmodern. What was so important about modern? And the people who appropriated this term or name, particularly Eliot and Pound, they were strangely and surprisingly the most anti-modern. They were medievalists, and they were conservative to the core, and they were against everything modern, including modern industry, including modern democracy, including modern science. So, what is left? And it is strange that they were able to bully the entire world and get themselves accepted as the modern. So, these were the two modernists. And to give you an example, Ezra Pound was from America, living in Italy, because he thought his own country was uncivilized. Hence, migrated to Europe, which he thought was the civilized part of the Western world, Europe, America. So he settled there. And so did Eliot. Eliot was highly influenced by Ezra Pound. You remember Eliot, T.S. Eliot, best known by his poem The Waste Land, which became an iconic kind of composition for modernism. That all that modernism means is what is there in that poem, The Waste Land. What kind of ideas, what kind of form, what kind of style, prosody, everything emanating from that one piece. It was so influential, and this pair was so influential that they could get themselves accepted as the modernists, although, as I said, they were the last people to be accepted as modernists. They were medievalists, and they were conservatives. They were against everything modern. And when World War II ended, the Americans arrested their own man, Ezra Pound, and took him to America as a prisoner of war. Why? Because he was on the side of the fascists. Hitler, Mussolini, so on and so forth. They were supporters of these people, and we call them modern or modernists. So something has to be done about literary history. I had said that in my own new history of English literature, that these traditional histories which are still continuing of Oxford, Cambridge, Rutledge, so on and so forth, they need to do some rethinking on the subject. And they should not be misleading people into calling what is not really the truth. Calling people modern who was anti-modern. So, history, whatever comes in print, does not become sacred or sanctimonious. Unfortunately, that is the human tendency. Whatever is printed, whatever has come out as a book, we take it as sacred and we don't challenge it, we don't question it, we just accept it. So, these are some of the things which we must keep in mind before we apply our minds to history, or we proceed with history, or we accept history. Now, coming to this period called the postmodern, who were the people who really made a departure with modernism, made a break with that, and insisted upon being called postmodern? And how thereafter, one after another, and the list now runs into hundreds. They have come and gone, but the label stays. There have been movements, structuralism, post-structuralism, feminism, post-feminism, American feminism, French feminism, so on and so forth, and number of things. And yet, this one thing, postmodern, this has not changed. So, there is this big dichotomy between the effects of the case and the jargon about it, the jargon which has been created by the influential writers. Now, who were these writers who came up on the scene about 100 years ago, and they began a new sort of wave which they called postmodern? Now, one of these was Roland Barthes. By the way, all these thinkers, writers, influential leaders in a way in the field of history and literature, they were French. And the first name that comes to mind in this line of thought is Roland Barthes, Barthes, but in French the last syllable remains silent. So we pronounce it Barth, not Barthes or Barths, it is Barth. So John Barth wrote one very important piece. He wrote many others, but one is more relevant for us, and that was the death of the author. This came out in 1968. The death of the author which became very, very influential after that, because we could never go back to the pre-Barthian era of thought. Now, what does he say in that essay, Death of the Author? Actually, this is based on or parallel to that Nietzsche's, the German philosopher, book called Death of God. So he gave that death of God theory about the modern world. The idea was that in the modern world there is no God. In the earlier societies, which were largely religion based, there was a God and there were gods also. But after the dominance of science, beginning with the 14th century, and complete takeover by the 20th, this has done away with the religious thought. So God no longer exists. In fact, the newer generation, if you say, they'll say, what is that, or who is he? So, Nietzsche said, we are living in a godless world. We may be retaining it as a word, as a name, but the belief associated with that is no longer there. Earlier, this was key to our belief, to our culture, to our values, to our entire system of life. Now all that is gone. We may just traditionally use the word God, but we don't really believe in it or subscribe to it. Routinely we may say that. But there were times when people were not only believing in it sincerely, but living by all that it meant. So Nietzsche said we are living in a world which is godless. So he wrote that famous book of philosophy, Death of God philosophy, German. So on the same pattern, Roland Barthes, this French literary writer or critic, he wrote that famous essay in 1968, Death of the Author, by which he meant that no piece of writing, it may be creative or critical, it may be drama, fiction, short story, poem, whatever, the stamp of the author has no meaning. And we should not bother to know who has written this. Whether the play is by Shakespeare or Ben Jonson or Marlowe or any other, it hardly matters. What matters is the text, not the author. So the focus now shifted from the author to the text. So author is declared dead. The author does not exist. What exists is words and a combination of words. And it is from these words that the meaning flows, not from the author. Not from the author's intention, what he or she wants to say. So this was a radical change, which means author has no existence, death of the author. The only thing is in existence is the words on the page, and therefore interpret them as they are. Well, this too began with a linguist called Ferdinand de Saussure, 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 Ferdinand de Saussure. He wrote the famous book which became so influential called A General Introduction to Linguistics. A General Introduction to Linguistics. One of the central things in that thesis of the book is that we should not arbitrarily define things. What is a table? What is a chair? What is a fan? That a chair has a seat and 4 legs or 3 legs, or fan has 3 hands and it revolves around the center, so on and so forth. He says this is not the right way of defining things, and therefore he insisted that things must be defined negatively. What it is not. A chair is not a chair because it is not a table. It is not a fan. It is not a tree, so on and so forth. This again is a very strange way of defining things, because how many things? There are 101,001 or millions of things which are not like the table or the chair or the fan. So, that is problematic. We will continue with this. Thank you. Yeah, well, to resume our story of postmodernism, we were discussing Roland Barthes and how he used Nietzsche, his book Death of God, on an analogical level as death of the author. And he said author is unimportant. once something has been composed, has been written and printed on the page, all that matters is that writing, and not who wrote it. This is again problematic. That reminds me of E.D. Hirsch. E.D. Hirsch, Hirschche. He is an American critic, and I share my views with him because our views are very similar. I was happy to read him, that at least there is one who thinks like I do. His query is to these death of the author advocates. The query is, can the words arrange themselves? If you say there is no author, or the author is dead, and words will speak for themselves. Then he says, my question is, can these words arrange themselves? Which word will come first and then second, third, so on and so forth? Who decided that? After all, somebody decided. We call him author. Now, if somebody put these words in the order in which they are, then whoever did that, his intention has gone into that arrangement of words. Otherwise, how come that every new author have his own kind of writing, his own arrangement of words, his own structure of thought as well as language? So you cannot really wish away the author. You cannot make him anonymous, that he or she doesn't exist. And if he does, then you cannot eliminate his wish, because his ideas, his emotions, his feelings, everything has gone into whatever he has written. How can you separate this from that, the author from his writing? You cannot do that, because it is his or her writing, no one else's. That's why the copyright, so on and so forth, and you don't print anything without the name of the author. You can't have anonymous printing, anonymous books. You have to have a name, and the book is known by that name, by the particular set of ideas, emotions, thought for which the person stands, maybe a man or woman. So E.D. Hirsch posed that question to the postmodernists. Answer me on this. What do you say? How can you have any writing without the author? So he dismissed Roland Barthes, his contention in the essay Death of the Author 1968 on this very ground, to which I subscribe. To me, it is a very sound ground. Saussure reduced language and linguistics to something technical, something mechanical, as if it's a chemical equation, as if it is just a combination of equations, mathematical. So their insistence is, you cannot do that, because there is the vital difference between that kind of thing, like industrial, chemical or physical, or nuclear, whatever, and things done by the humans. So the human factor cannot be eliminated. If you do, then you are on a very dangerous path. You are destroying all that is human in humanity, in history, in literature, in all that we have created, achieved, and raised on this earth. So these were the vital questions which came up during this phase of postmodernism. So the first one, as I said, was Roland Barthes, and before him Saussure, that linguist, who reduced it to technicality by saying not words, he says signified and signifier. Word is signifier, and the object like table or chair or fan, this is signified, something defined, something described. Now that becomes signified. Look at the way of saying it. So you are taking away completely the human element from life, from writing, from everything in the name of knowledge or literature or history, and you are reducing it to merely signs and symbols. So the three key words or important words here in Saussure are sign, signifier, signified. Just these three. And through these three you say everything. It's very strange. Are you promoting language or choking language? I would say it amounts to choking it. It's so reductive. You reduce the entire richness, depth, multi-layeredness of language to this blankness, to this emptiness, to this absurd simplicity. Are you promoting language or killing it? So these postmodern linguists like Saussure, they did that disservice, I would say, to language and literature studies. So that is about Roland Barthes and his famous or notorious essay, Death of the Author. Now the next name that comes in line is Michel Foucault, again a French, Foucault, but spellings are very different as always. Foucault, Foucault, will be pronounced as Foucault, not Foucault. And Michael, as in French, Michel. In English, it will be Michael. So, Michael Foucault is the next name that figures in the series of postmodernist thinkers, theorists, writers. They were more of theorists. Each one of them came out with a theory of his or her own. So it cannot really be called a movement like the earlier movements. Earlier there was some sort of unity, compactness, uniformity, or some sort of shared set of ideas or emotions, or a program of action or contemplation. And I gave you the example of the Elizabethan age. The moment you say it, we know what it means. All those political, social, historical, literary ideas put together during the period of the Elizabethan age. Similarly, the Augustan age or the Victorian age. So, immediately you mention it, we know what it means. But when you say postmodernism, we don't really know what it means. Because there is no agreed meaning imparted to it. Had it been there, we would have moved further. We have not moved. 100 years, as I said, have passed. World War I, and we are still stuck up with modernism and postmodernism. Modernism, as I said, which was not modernism. And postmodernism, meaningless because you arbitrarily said whatever now follows for hundreds and thousands and millions of years will remain postmodern. And what was that modernism? Not modernism, as I said, in the real sense. It was reactionary, it was medievalism. So, in this line of thinkers, the names that cropped up, who became leaders during this period in the Western world. First, as I said, was Roland Barthes. The second is Michael Foucault. Michael Foucault wrote two very famous books. One was Civilization and its Discontents. Means the entire progress of civilizations is based upon a set of negatives. Its discontents, its dissatisfactions, its grouses, its unfulfilled desires, emotions, thoughts. So, that is Michael Foucault's thesis. Hence, the history of civilization is nothing but a series of discontents, dissatisfactions. That was one book that Foucault wrote and which became very influential. second he wrote was History of Sexuality, which was in a way path breaking. He said, you cannot say what is man or what is woman are things which are eternal or permanent or unchanging or stable. He says they are bound in space and time. They are historically confined within time and space. He says what we believe in now, which means beginning of the middle of the 20th century or later part of the 20th century. He says our belief what is man and what is woman is not something which has always been there. He says they are the ideas which were formulated during the 19th century. Very recent, not before 19th century. And we think they are eternal or permanent, which they are not. Tomorrow you may have very different views about what is man or what is woman. So this again was in a way path breaking, very radical, because he made us review the whole course of knowledge, history, thinking, Western thought. And we were compelled to look back and review. And we find that every now and then, every 50 years or so, as Eliot says, the world changes. Our views about the world, about man, about life, all this changes. And hence, nothing has ever been stable or static or unchanging. So, change is the law of nature. And it has never stopped, it will never stop. Continuously it has gone on, it will go on. This is the lesson one derives from Foucault's book, History of Sexuality. So he says it's a very recent history. There have been histories before, there will be histories hereafter. So it is wrong to fix any ideas in the stream of history, which is ever flowing, which is never stopping. So this too was a very radical idea. So first Roland Barthes, then Michel Foucault. Third name that came up, again a French writer, a philosopher in his own right. In fact, the real philosopher, which these two were not. He was Jacques Derrida, Jaquis, but in French it will be pronounced as Jacques Derrida, Derrida. Now, Jacques Derrida's name is associated with what is now very popular and famous as deconstruction. Deconstruction in literary criticism, in literary theory. That you learn things not by giving them positive definition of what they are, but you have to learn to know how it was made, and you should be able to unmake it. For example, the structure of this room. You must go into how this structure was raised. So, brick by brick, you dismantle it, you deconstruct it. So, the ideas of constructions now reverse to deconstruction. And Jacques Derrida wrote in this context an important book called Writing and Difference. Writing and difference. In French, spellings are the same, difference. But in French it is pronounced as difference. So he wrote that famous book, Writing and Difference, where he says you have to know things by differentiating them, not by isolating them, not by defining them in isolated spaces, but rather relate them to each other. And then go into the very foundation, how a structure was raised, how a form was constructed. It may be a poem or a novel or drama or whatever. And then you have to deconstruct it, piece by piece. You should be able to dismantle it. You should be able to know it by parts. That is deconstruction. So, writing and difference. So, writing not for defining things positively, but writing for differentiating it with the other. And Jacques Derrida, he challenged the entire philosophy of the West and rewrote it. He says it needs to be deconstructed, because otherwise you will continue with lot of wrong ideas, wrong beliefs, just by, you say, repetition or convention. You have been used to something and you are continuing with it. He said, no, we have to stop somewhere. We have to look back. We have to go into how things have gone on, and we have to deconstruct them, go to the very roots, very foundations of these structures, and then understand the nature of these structures. So, that is deconstruction. So, these were the famous writers of the period we call postmodern. So, it is very important to remember them. These three in particular, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. because these three put together, they give you, if not comprehensive, a fairly good idea of what this period was like. Why is it called postmodern? Because these three had questioned the very foundations of modernism and made us rethink, re-examine and reconstruct the whole thing. It may be Western history, it may be Western philosophy, it may be our literary history. So, all these, they compelled us to rethink, re-examine. Thank you for the day.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us a precious session. And dear friends, we would like to tell you all that we are on the verge of ending up this series. Tomorrow is the last lecture, and tomorrow we will be talking on the post-colonial school. So, dear friends, we would like you to give your feedback for the entire series.
Post-colonialism, we may call it.
Definitely. Tomorrow we would be...
Just like post-modernism, post-colonialism.
Definitely. We would be discussing on post-colonialism tomorrow, and we would like you to give your feedback for the entire series. Our email ID is info.cc@nic.in, and if you have any queries, or if you feel so that some of the point you have missed out, or you want to know the answer of particular question, then definitely you can mail us. We would be meeting again tomorrow and would be discussing on the last topic of the series. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.